Hey, yo. I wanna talk about how Magic the Gathering's record-breaking sales are a reflection of the game's unmatched quality and value for the player base. But first, a word from our sponsor, Ray Cogni. Whilst using a mattress meal kit online or abroad, make sure that you're secure with 21 days worth of wireless sleep. One subscription covers unlimited earbuds, and RFID blocking, and checkout code, and
If you're listening to this, then I'm dead. Or not, whatever, it doesn't matter. Do you know what some of my favourite cards are in Magic the Gathering? It's Mana Rocks, and not even for mechanical reasons. Sure, having a card that ramps up your mana allowing you to play other more powerful cards is fine. But first, Mana Rocks aren't unique in being able to do that. A lot of creatures like Clan of War Elves can do that too, as well as spells like Dark Ritual. And second, that kind of mechanical ramp utility isn't exactly thrilling in and of itself. However, Mana Rocks do thrill me. And whenever either a new one is printed or an old one is reprinted with new art, I'm interested. Admittedly, less so if it's a Sol Ring, as that's the least interesting Mana Rock out there, which I've talked about previous. Probably in another video, so I guess go track that down if you want to hear my reasoning as to why I think Sol Rings are bad. But stick around if you want to hear my impassioned explanation as to why cards like Honoured Heirloom and other 3-cost Mana Rocks are so cool and why they should be shown more love. And in short, it's the flavour, and how these Mana Rocks are often the best shorthand of any card in a set to demonstrate what makes a plane unique. And the reason they're so great is because they don't just do it via the art or the flavour text, but through the mechanics. And I believe that's possible because 3-cost Mana Rocks provide a template for design that starts with it's a 3-cost colourless artifact. There's basically going to be one in most sets. They always tap to add at least 1 mana, which means there's not much room on the card for additional text. So during the design process, I imagine the question becomes, given the template, what additional rule can we add that makes this specific Mana Rock unique and representative of the set that it's from in as concise a method as possible? Basically drill down into the core of the set and then convey that essence through a single line of rules text. And the way that WotC often achieve that is, it's artistry, honestly. It's beautiful. So to take Honoured Heirloom as the premier example, Innistrad is all about the battle for the living against the undead, and so its rules text say, exile target card from a graveyard. Perfection. A rule simple enough that you might never give it a second thought, but if you do, you'll be rewarded for your efforts because cards like this tell a short story. It's great. And in fact, this mechanical narrative cohesion is so good that I can even overlook what I would otherwise consider to be a flaw in the rest of the flavour. See, I like the art, I think it's very pretty, but Symbols of Avacyn don't really look like that. It should be made out of moon silver and not whatever that rainbow quartz is that we're seeing. The art doesn't actually fit the vibe of Innistrad at all in my opinion. Even other examples of rune chanters forge their runes into moon silver, so this just doesn't work, and yet I would still consider the flavour of this card a slam dunk 10 out of 10 purely because of how narratively cohesive that rules text is. I love it. Let's look at some more examples. And I tell you what, let's make it a game. I'll tell you that Furdock Core is a 3-cost Mana Rock from Lorwyn Eclipsed. And so now take a moment. What additional thing that comes to mind when you think about Lorwyn and Shadowmoor could be represented on this card via additional rules text? Well, if you said Shapeshifter and Changeling, you'd be spot on. So I suppose technically this card has a bunch of additional rules, but all of them serve one purpose. And that purpose is to say, hey, Lorwyn has Shapeshifters, the plane is famous for its Changelings, but a Mana Rock isn't one of those, so for this one, let's do that. And the way that WotC did it was to first give the card Changeling. But on an artifact, that's a bit pointless. So they also let you spend 4 to turn this stone circle into a creature, which I think is in keeping with the Fey Celtic vibe of the plane too. Awesome. But what really knocks this out of the park for me is the fact it also has Kindred. So even as you cast it, any triggers that would pop off for casting a creature also work with this card, implying that this was a creature the entire time just hiding in plain sight. Pure flavour. Let's do another one, and for this one I'm going to show you the rules text instead, and then let you guess the plane. And it won't be tricky, but that's sort of the point. Each dragon you control enters with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. Any ideas? Well, if you said this was from Tarkir, you know, the plane all about dragons, you would be 100% correct. And some of you might be thinking, well, that was obvious and a predictable one. Just having its rules text give dragons +1 counters is like low-hanging fruit when it comes to tying a card's mechanics in with a plane's flavor. But that's why it's genius. Mana Rocks have perfected the art of being a signpost of a specific plane or setting, using as little text as possible. There's beauty in the minimalistic approach, which I think is particularly impressive when you consider that WotC often don't rely on keywords to do it. Because yeah, when you think about it, obviously the Mana Rock from the Dragon plane would buff dragons. What else would it do? So the rules text of this card is simplistic, true, but that simplicity leads to the immediacy of understanding that this is from Tarkir, and that's part of why it's perfect. Okay, let's do another one. I love this one so much, this one might be one of my favourites. This is Darksteel Ingot from Darksteel, and have a think about the one thing that you know about Darksteel, and now have a guess as to what additional rule this card has. Are you ready? Yeah, it's indestructible. Obviously, it doesn't do anything else, which might make you think it's not very good because, you know, how often are people really gonna expend the mana or a card to try and destroy a 3-cost Mana Rock? How often is removing this card gonna be someone's priority? Like, not very often, so that would mean indestructible on a not very good card isn't exactly worth it. But that's kind of the point. Darksteel is indestructible. Mirrodin, the plane that Darksteel, the set, took place on, is known for its indestructible artifacts. So how do you represent that on a Mana Rock? Give it indestructible. But also you need to bear in mind the standard environment that was in place when this set first released. Because you may look at Darksteel Ingot today and scoff, but at the time, Mirrodin block very much had a focus on artifact matters, and so having any artifact be indestructible actually made sense, at least from a design perspective, because affinity for artifacts was a keyword that was being used at the time. Meaning, and this isn't a Mana Rock, but it's another card that I love, which is an example of this. Cards like Darksteel Relic, which was released in New Phyrexia, were part of the Scars of Mirrodin block, which also had an Artifact Matters theme with things like Metal Craft, but well, a card like that might seem pointless because it's a 0 cost, sure, but it doesn't do anything. It's just indestructible. But, and I'm not going to try and convince you that either this or Darksteel Ingot are, or were ever quote-unquote good cards, but I can see why they exist, and where the fun is in their design space. Because while cards like this are very simplistic in their design, and not very good on their own, the reason you'd play a 0-cost artifact that doesn't do anything, or choose a 3-cost Mana Rock that only does indestructible, is because, hey, maybe it triggers other cards that care when you play an artifact. Maybe ensuring that you have a board full of artifacts triggers other cards that care about how many artifacts you have out. These cards aren't really good by today's standard, but that's mostly because of today's design focus on low-cost powerhouse cards that do it all. But the sort of gameplay where you're expected to pull a bunch of not very good cards together to try and turn them into something more powerful, well, I think Magic was a more fun game when it used to be like that. I'd love to see a return to these kinds of more simplistic yet comboable and flavorful designs. So I love Darksteel Ingot for what it represents, and I mean that in multiple ways. Anyway, Mana Rocks. Let's do one from a set I didn't even really like that much. Can you guess from which set this Mana Rock is from, given its additional rules text of start your engines and max speed? Not particularly tricky this one, but again, that is sort of what I love about these cards. Because yeah, you guessed it, it's Aether Drift. Starting Column, which, whilst having some fantastic art, does have a questionable mechanic. Sacrifice this artifact to draw 2 cards, then discard a card, which... And maybe card draw thematically represented something a little unusual in Aether Drift, but my guess would be draw 2 cards represents going faster, and the discarding a card represents being reckless in your driving, but why sacrifice the artifact? In fact, why have the race's starting column be something that you, presumably as the racer, have any control over at all? But to be clear, much like my issue with Honored Heirloom, That's a complaint I have with the card's internal flavour. I think sacrificing this card to go faster but becoming more reckless would make more sense if it was instead called something like NOS Canister or like Turbo Injector or something. But from the perspective of it being a mana rock that is informing the player of the overall flavour of its setting via its mechanics, I think it nails it and is great. Internal flavour issues aside, this card does scream Aether Drift. Okay, let's do a fun one. Haunted Screen. This is from Duskmourn, and I do want to talk about the card's mana ability, but before that, have a guess, what do you think a mana rock from Duskmourn representing a haunted screen would do? Are you ready? If you said turn into a spirit because of course that's what haunted artifacts on Duskmourn do, then you would be spot on. Interestingly, it actually becomes a spirit with 7 +1/+1 counters, presumably as a reference to horror movie The Ring, in which you're killed by a haunted screen 7 days after watching a cursed videotape. But this card has the added quirk of not just tapping for colourless mana, or mana of any colour, but instead for black or white. You know, like a black or white TV, which were still prevalent in the early 80s, a time period that Duskmourn draws a lot of inspiration from. Or you can pay 1 life to generate the other colours, just like how in the 80s you could pay more to get a colour TV. Making this both smart internal design with its mana generation, and good representation of the plane with it becoming a spirit. Wonderful. Okay, next let's look at, alright, yeah, this one. As you can see, this is another one that doesn't just generate colourless mana, or one of any colour, and I'll give you a hint, it is part of a cycle, which, the others generate the other 3 colour combinations, but can you guess which plane? Yes, cared about cycling, but more importantly had a focus on the 3 colour wedges. Well, if you said Ikoria, you'd be right. And realistically, just showing the 1 card doesn't really do the concept here justice, because what's communicative about Ikoria with these mana mechanics is that there's 5 of these cards. 5 crystals, 1 each representative of one of the 5 triomes of Ikoria. I even like that they're crystals actually, because Ikoria had a focus on crystals in the art, but that's neither here nor there. The cycling aspect of the cards, well, I'm not sure what that represents honestly, but then that's less of an issue I have with the mechanics usage here, and more an issue I have with the mechanic itself, because honestly, I've never known what cycling is supposed to represent. I mean, let me know in the comments if you can tell me what the flavour of cycling is actually about, because to me it's always felt like a card game mechanic, kind of devoid of context from the cards that actually have it. I don't know, it feels like literally any card could justifiably have cycling based on all of the ones that have had it before. Like there's not really a common theme between any of those cards. But aside from that, as a way to represent the triomes of Ikoria, I think having a cycle of mana rocks each with their own 3 distinct colour wedge, well, I think these cards do that plain justice. It's great. Right, let's speedrun a few and then end with another one of my favourites. Here we go, Phyrexian Atlas, take a moment. What could this card do outside of generating mana? Well, if you said, care about poison counters, you'd be correct. Because obviously Phyrexia is all about its oil and its poison counters, but more importantly about using that corruption to seep into their opponents and weaken them over time. Whenever it becomes tapped, each opponent with 3 or more poison counters loses 1 life. Perfect design that perfectly represents the insidious infiltration of Phyrexia. How about this one? Tap an untapped legendary creature you control to add 1 mana of any colour. What plane has a history of legendary creatures either being empowered by artifacts, or possibly used by those said artifacts, to generate mana which is then used to ramp into even more power? Dominaria. If any plane in Magic is about legends, using magical artifacts, or being used by magical artifacts, then Dominaria would be it. And you may say, well, this one feels maybe a bit vague, the mechanic, like this is kind of bog standard Magic affair, but that's only because for a long time Dominaria kind of was Magic. Dominaria has always been the center of the multiverse that other planes are compared to, I guess, so I actually think given that, this mana rock is on point. Let's do Letter of Acceptance. This one is great actually. This is from Strixhaven. Have a think. What could it do? And I'll give you a clue. It's quite a simple mechanic, but when you stop and appreciate it, you'll hopefully see that it's brilliant. Here we go. Sacrifice the Letter of Acceptance, draw a card. I'll say it. Genius. That's genius design. I think this probably would have been overlooked by a lot of players, or maybe the narrative cohesion with this mechanic may have gone underappreciated, because if you think about it, you get the Letter of Acceptance, and yes, it itself is magical, hence the mana generation, but eventually you'll discard the letter because you're going to a magical school to learn new spells, hence the Draw a card. That's brilliant. Here's another good one. Your devotion to each colour and each combination of colours is increased by 1. And if you control a god, demigod or legendary enchantment, you gain 1 life. If those mechanics don't scream a specific plane at you, then I don't know which ones would. It is, of course, Theros. And was that easy? Sure, but that's my point. The flavour and world building here is so on point that a Theros card is instantly recognisable from rules text alone. This is a home run in terms of flavour. As gods care about devotion, this is an altar, it amplifies your devotion, and if you live on Theros and you're in tune with Theros' gods or legends, then your life is literally improved. Flawless. Last one, Hierophant's Chalice from Ixalan. But more importantly, from the vampires of Ixalan. So have a think, how are vampires usually mechanically represented in Magic? And so what could this card do? Are you ready? When Hierophant's Chalice enters the battlefield, target opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Now obviously you could say that this card didn't take the Tarkir route of just having vampires gain +1 or whatever, but I actually think this card did do that, because you gaining life when an opponent loses life is the classic vampire mechanic. Yes, they're not the only cards that work that way, but Blood Artist, Veto of the Duskrose, Sanguine Bond, Exquisite Blood, more recently Bloodthirsty Conqueror. None of these cards have identical mechanics, but they all work in the same vein. Pun intended, I guess. A vein in which this mana rock now fits perfectly. It's excellent. Right, and let's end on one of my favourites. Warden of the Wall. I love this card, I run it in every commander deck that I can. Yes, because it's another Innistrad one. But I think it has fantastic flavourful mechanics. But I tell you what, I'm not going to explain them. I'm going to leave that with you to think about. Share your thoughts in the comments if you think you know why this card is not only internally on point between both the flavour of the name and art and the mechanics, but why it also tells you it's a card representative of Innistrad without having to use any Innistrad keywords, or, well, without even having any flavour text. I think Warden of the Wall achieves all that, so have a guess in the comments if you think you know how, because I think that this card is great. Just like most 3 mana rocks. That's why I love them. And that's the end of the video. At least for you, because I'm going to try and record another one of these immediately after this one for a second video that I'll release later. I don't know when that will come out, but if you get these back to back, then you should take that as a sign that I'm definitely dead for sure. Pretty sure I've said that before. Anyway, bye for now, and with any luck, you won't even be able to spot in the next video that I recorded these at the same time because I intend to make the transition completely unnoticeable. Thank you very much for watching this video, and thank you to everyone that supports me, like 27 Publications, Eggboy the Particle that permeates all existence, Blank Space, Wanpako Jozu, Miss Murder, a random Patreon, and the rest of my patrons whose names are on screen now. I'd also like to thank the sponsor for this video, me and my Patreon page, where you can get your name credited on screen too. Check it out in the link in the description below. Hit the like button, leave a comment, run Warden of the Wall in every deck, and most importantly, subscribe and share this video with a friend. Hit the notification bell and do all those things the algorithm loves. If you agree or disagree with any of my points, or you want to see me do a video on another subject, let me know, and I will see you next time.